Hello, and welcome to the Paranormal Operator Podcast, where we talk about all manner of things that go bump in the night. Here, we discuss sightings, news, investigations, and popular media surrounding the paranormal, supernatural, and occult phenomena. So settle in as we search for the truth. I'm your host, Adam, Operator 23. On tonight's episode, we will be discussing the Lizard Man of Bishopville, South Carolina. It's a muggy summer night in South Carolina. You are driving home after working the night shift. You hear a pop and get feedback in the steering. You have a flat tire. And unless you want to walk the 7 miles home or be stuck on the side of the road in rural South Carolina, you're going to have to change the tire. So you pull over and get it done. It is about 2:30 a.m. While securing your tools in the trunk, you turn to spot a tall creature standing on 2 legs with red glowing eyes. And then you realize it's running towards you. Getting behind the wheel of your car, the creature closes the distance and leaps onto the roof. You step on the gas, and the creature loses its grip, falling off, only to pace your car at 35 miles an hour. Jumping back on the roof, you swerve back and forth to rid yourself of the beast. Arriving home, you lay on the horn, not wanting to exit your car alone. Your dad comes out to see what is going on. In your panic, you forgot to turn off the car as you ran inside. Coming to tears, you explain what has just happened. Your distress is evident as you were overwhelmed with emotion. Your dad, going to shut off the car, finds scratches on the roof, and the driver's side mirror is twisted and bent. Clearly, something had happened. You had survived an encounter with the Lizard Man of Bishopville. So what exactly did happen to Christopher Davis at only age 17 there that night on Browntown Road in Bishopville, South Carolina? Well, it's unclear. But his story is the most prominent account told of the Lizard Man, and it is definitely the most memorable. The story does not start here, however, and while there are several books that talk about the creature, none do so in any great detail, except for one, Lizard Man, The True Story of the Bishopville Monster by Lyle Blackburn, which is entirely dedicated to the subject. Another book, Palmetto State Monsters, Cryptids and Legends of South Carolina by David Weatherby, comes in at a distant second. Now let us take a look at what might be going on in rural Lee County, South Carolina. Full disclosure, I am not sponsored by any of the sources linked below. Bishopville, with 3,471 residents, is the seat of Lee County, South Carolina, whose total population is around 16,531. Zooming in, the community of Browntown is closest to the epicenter for most of our reports. Even though Chris Davis's encounter is probably the most prominent of all the stories that we're going to be talking about today, there are other stories previous to his encounter that we know had been circulating for at least the past 2 years. Davis himself even admits having heard some of those stories. So here we're going to take a look at the chronology of the stories in the order that they happened, not necessarily in the order that they were reported. In Blackburn's book, he has a segment on Native American lore, and while it is interesting and normally I would start there, it is not entirely relevant to this case, mainly because the species which are recounted by, I believe, the Creeks were a reptilian hominid, that particular species was said by the natives to have gone extinct. And since there are no apparent accounts reported in the historical period prior to the 1980s, unfortunately, I don't think there's much room for lore in this particular episode. Our first encounter happens in the spring of 1986 while working, presumably in the daytime. George Plyer spots what he describes as a creature with a human-shaped face, round eyes, and arms like an ape. It is bipedal, and when spotted, flees on those 2 feet. He also stated that the arms were long, longer than a human's, and the legs were also long and skinny, and except for the face, it looked like a reptile. The 3 other workers who were with him did not see the creature, and Plyer thought it best not to mention it, lest he lose his help. The other men were there helping him to set up, from what I understand, hog pens. Upon returning to the site and inspecting the area, Plyer found 3-toed footprints, which he estimated to be around 12 to 15 inches long. And this spot here on the map is not the exact spot, but it is on the road that he had his encounter on. So this is Springvale Road. The following year, October 1987, George Holloman, parched from a midnight bike ride, had stopped to get himself a drink from an artesian well and to take a smoke, when he noticed what he thought was a stump. However, when the stump stood up at about 7 to 8 feet tall and glared at him with glowing red eyes, he quickly ended his smoke break. Luckily, the lights from an approaching car scared off the creature. He was just underneath the bridge at Scape Ore Swamp. 1988 saw the brunt of Lizard Man hysteria. In spring, probably April or May, Frank Mitchell, a local crop duster pilot and musician, saw a grayish-brown bipedal creature with a monkey-like face lope across his airfield as he was taking off. This incident happened sometime in the late morning, so there would have been light to see the creature. Unfortunately, though, as he banked around to try and get a better look of the thing, it had already disappeared into the woods. By his account, it had come across the airfield, stopped, looked at him, and then continued on. Unfortunately, he was at the end of the runway, to the point where he either needed to take off or throttle down. And so, taking off, doubling back, the creature was already gone by the time he was able to return to the spot. Getting back to Christopher Davis, it was his father, Tommy Davis, who had compelled him to report the June 28th encounter to the sheriff's office. His description of the creature, beyond its bipedalism, was that its arms swayed as it ran, and it had black fingernailed hands, which he was able to see through the windshield as it jumped onto the top of his car. Many in the law enforcement world would probably not have treated the veracity of such a report like Sheriff Lisden Trisdale did. But he felt that something had in fact happened to the boy, and that the father was of good enough character to corroborate at least the damage on the car and the amount of distress that the incident caused Chris. All the aforementioned accounts were not reported until this inciting incident. The next month following Davis's encounter, on July 24th, the sheriff office received a report of vandalism. Tom and Mary Way had found their 85 Ford LTD had been mauled. The damage included scratches and dents around the side walls, a broken hood ornament, and chrome trim being torn away from the fender, a bent antenna, and somehow wires inside the engine bay had been torn out of the motor. Sheriff Truesdale called in state biologists, and they found tracks, some of which were unidentifiable, along with tracks and fur of what they believed to have been a red fox. In the crowd, some offered the idea that perhaps this had been the work of a, quote, 7-foot-tall, red-eyed creature that was said to live in the nearby swamp, end quote. Among the crowd was an acquaintance of Truesdale's, and he asked him whether he had heard of such a creature, and the man replied, quote, "What do you mean, that lizard man?" End quote. The next 3 accounts are most likely hoaxes. The first involves some teens reporting a road crossing, and the second is the evidence found by the deputy sheriffs. I'm not suggesting that the teens did not see something, but instead that someone perpetrated a sighting to elicit a police response. The reason, I think, was so they could plant evidence in the shape of debris, broken trees, and the famous 3-toed footprints. The sighting and investigation happened initially in the evening and hours of the night, with the deputies returning in the morning to search for additional clues. The tracks are clearly a hoax, as no natural animal through a course of evolution would have developed feet such as these. Now, I do not remember exactly what source it was that I saw or heard or read this from, but I tend to kind of agree that, to me, what is most probable is that someone had some kind of a track and outfitted it onto a horse. You see, the tracks were found at about 1 inch in depth, pressed into the hard ground. Truesdale even commented that he stomped on the ground and could not make a track. So, I think it's plausible that it was probably outfitted to a horse, and then the horse walked through, leaving these tracks. What does make it interesting is that some of the trash and debris found were kind of odd. For instance, there were trees that had limbs snapped off at around the 8-foot level, and some of the debris were 40-gallon cans, or barrels, rather, that had seemingly been crushed. The deputies came to the conclusion that most of the debris and trash was probably off of the back of a truck. And, well, people probably could have stood in the back of the same truck to break off the branches. So, I'm not entirely sold on that. Not to mention that almost any biologist will tell you these tracks are not real. So, the third account is definitely a hoax, because he actually eventually admitted to it being a hoax. So this was perpetrated by an airman from the nearby Air Force Base, who stated he had mortally wounded the creature with his .357. Instead of receiving a Medal of Bravery, however, he received a citation for an unlicensed handgun and for filing a false police report. Hopefully, the idea was this would send a message to any would-be hoaxers that while the sheriff's department was taking the Lizard Man seriously, that it was also going to enforce the regular everyday today laws as well. Luckily, he is not the only service member to file a report. So the airman made his hoax on August 8th. But on August 26th, a colonel in the Army Corps of Engineers, who is identified in Weatherly's book as Roger Cooper, stated to the deputies that he and his wife had seen an 8-foot tall creature dart across the road in front of them. He also added that this creature had a long tail which almost reached the ground. As far as the location goes, I was not able to find the exact location, but it was somewhere in the area of Ashwood Lake. The pilot, Kenneth Mitchell, from my understanding, his encounter was also somewhere around Ashwood Lake, but I really couldn't find much behind that to actually support where exactly it was. Coincidentally, and very intriguingly, there was another person who had brought up a interesting incident here at Ashwood Lake where apparently a woman had her head spun all the way around on her body, so breaking her neck. I kind of want to hear more about that story. The Cooper's encounter was it up until 1990, when on July 30th, it wasn't just 2 people in a car, but a car full of people that saw the creature. Unfortunately, their location I was not able to pin down, but it would have been somewhere along this stretch of road right here. Because I know they were traveling west, they had just passed the interstate, and they were on Browntown Road at the intersection of Hickory Hill. Unfortunately, I cannot find Hickory Hill Road, but theoretically it would be somewhere along this area. So, this time, a car full of people saw a hulking creature that apparently attacked their car. As Bertha Blyers puts it, she swerved so that the creature would not have reached through the window and snatched her daughter out of the car while it was traveling down the road. This creature was described as 6 foot or taller with brown fur. Due to the woman's distress, Sheriff Truesdale took her story to be true. So the other folks in the car with her would have been her other children. And the main child to corroborate her claim was her 18-year-old son, who also got a good look at the creature. Now just think about that. You're driving down the road, something comes out of the bush at the passenger side of the car and goes to reach for the door as you're going down the road. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the speed limit is on this road here. I'm going to guess it's probably 45, 55 miles an hour. This encounter must have happened pretty darn quick. I mean, to be able to get to a car as it's moving and then seemingly go to reach through the window, it's a little outlandish, but it definitely had this car full of people, kids and their mother, second guessing at what might exist in Lee County. It would be a whole nother year before the next incident in the fall of 1991. At some time, around 12:30 a.m., Brian and Michelle Elmore were returning home after a party when they too saw something alongside of the road. Turning around to get a better look, they almost hit the creature, which they describe as being gorilla-like, with long arms and legs, around 7 foot tall, with brown or black fur. Miss Elmore even stated that it looked like a Bigfoot. Again, this pin here is a general location. It would have happened somewhere along this road. I'm not entirely sure where along the section, but it was on this road. The last two accounts, besides a 2015 hoax, were vehicular vandalism, very similar to what happened to the Waze Ford. The first incident was February 28th of 2008. Bob and Dixie Rawson called the police to report damage to their Dodge Grand Caravan, with chunks missing out of the hood, holes punched into the grille, and both fenders being scratched and bent. Additionally, about 10 cats, which they took care of there at their house, had disappeared, and something had removed the towels out of the boxes where the cats slept without removing or disturbing the boxes themselves. On top of that, a dead cow and coyote were found in a nearby field. The last report was July 4th, 2011, by Leon and Ada Marshall, who had their Dodge Journey similarly vandalized. So the images you see here on screen, full disclosure, I'm not entirely sure they're showing two different vehicles. The one on the left are supposed to be the Rawson van. The ones on the right are supposed to be the Marshall van. The ones on the left, you can find in the Destination Truth video. And I know it's the Rawson van because it shows Miss Rawson. It shows Dixie Rawson in the TV series, the show. The ones on the right came from Fact or Faked Paranormal Files. And while they did interview the Marshalls, I don't know whether or not this is their van or not. And the reason why I say that is because the front end looks so much like a Grand Caravan. I've owned a Grand Caravan, and I'm fairly certain that the Journey has a slatted grill, whereas the Caravan has the honeycomb shaped. So there might not be any accessible pictures of the Marshall's vehicle. Granted, they never said that it was explicitly the Marshall's vehicle, but it's just kind of odd how they would go interview the Marshalls and then show these pictures. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that all four of these pictures are the same vehicle and that it does belong to the Rawsons. And what exactly are we to make of the dead cow and coyote in the field nearby? Well, who knows? It's just another layer of high strangeness. So what are we to make of these reports? Sheriff Truesdale's sentiment was that something was indeed going on, and that hopefully thorough police work would suss out whatever the culprit may be, whether it was a hoax or not. And with the amount of armed monster hunters and increased traffic, it did endanger the citizens of Lee County, thus requiring investigation. Nearly all of the encounters happened in or around Scape Ore Swamp, which is a blackwater swamp and tributary of the Petey River. The main channel is perennial, and being in the outer coastal plain mixed forest ecoregion, the area is dominated by various species of pine, oak, and hickory on the uplands, with species of tupelo and cypress inhabiting the floodplains. The area of Scape Ore Swamp immediately adjacent to Bishopville is only about 4 square kilometers, although the entire basin itself is 249 square kilometers. Large reptiles, such as the American alligator, do call its waters home, along with other animals such as beaver and river otter. On land, they have white-tailed deer, turkey, bobcat, gray fox, and the occasional black bear. It is important to note that very few of the 11 accounts actually refer to the creature as a reptile or even having a tail. Most describe the creature as a humanoid, large, and covered with fur. Christopher Davis even stated that it might have been dried mud on fur, which gave the appearance of scales. Also, according to Truesdale, there were more reports, or at least more accounts, that never got reported, mainly to people being afraid of the repercussions. Davis, in fact, recounted that had it happened to him again, he probably would not have reported it, simply because it got in the way of his life. He wasn't able to do his job, and he wasn't able to play basketball. So, we add all this together, the descriptions, and we can't rule out that whatever this thing has might leave a three-toed track, even though the tracks that were originally cast were completely fake. We can't forget Plyer's account, one of the very first accounts, where he found a three-toed track of something. And I'm not saying it's Bigfoot, but occasionally we do come across accounts where Bigfoot is attributed to a three-toed track somehow or another. So, adding up everything, I kind of feel like most of the accounts are probably a misidentified skunk ape or a Sasquatch. There is an alternative story, however, as Christopher Davis may have encountered a farmer trying to scare off a would-be AC thief. Mr. Lucius' brother Elmore was a butterbean farmer in the area, and on the same night, in the same area that Davis had his Lizard Man encounter, Lucius had scared off a person he thought was attempting to steal one of his AC units. Supposedly, Lucius was wearing a burlap blanket and had glasses which could have reflected the tail lights, giving the glowing red eyes appearance. However, there is no way that he could have jumped on Davis's car, nor pace it at 35 miles an hour. It is my understanding that at the time of the incident, Lucius would have been around 40 years old. As the stories changed, others came forward to say that it could not have been Lucius, as he was present at a different location that evening. Moreover, the details of Davis's story also changed to include whether or not his car had actually been attacked, and that is according to skeptical investigator Ben Radford. It is interesting, and I would have loved to have gotten my hands on the original report, maybe seen some photographs of the car, as to kind of suss out, what damage it had, and whether or not there was evidence that Davis actually had a flat tire or not. You see, what kind of seals the deal for me is that Lucius purportedly found an AC unit in the field on his way to run off the so-called thief. And that alone kind of makes me pause and say, well, could, Davis had been there trying to steal an air conditioning unit? Maybe. But if so, why did he make up the story? It is possible that the man, Lucius, in his burlap sack and with his glasses gleaming red, probably would have been quite a formidable sight. Not to mention that, from what I understand, he was standing up on a hill, so he probably would have appeared much larger than he actually was. And I could definitely see how a person who is committing an illegal act would definitely have their adrenaline ready to be kicked off at the slightest uh, inconvenience, or, you know, because you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. And in this case, he got caught, and quite possibly by something he figured was supernatural or otherworldly. Here is an image of the Elmore Butterbean shed. Unfortunately, the shed has been demolished since this particular photo, I want to say, is 2011. And the sign does still exist. It is, from what I understand, at the Cotton Museum there in Bishopville. So, was it here, outside of this shed, where Brother Lucius and Christopher Davis crossed paths? I wish I knew the answer. In this case, I feel that the car damage is probably the easiest thing to explain. And I am fairly confident that law enforcement had it right from the get-go. More than likely, this was a dog. So here I have a story from 2018, and, well, the pictures speak for themselves. Here you have a very similar pattern of damage as to what happened to the vans. Here's the same thing from a different angle. See, this guy up here, he's actually getting up kind of high on the hood. And then there's another one where they, yeah, see, he's all the way up here actually biting at whatever is available up there, probably the windshield wipers. Now, at the edge of the hood, I think would be probably a bit more difficult to explain, although I would imagine that that material is no thicker than this material here. If anything, it might actually be thinner because of how it tapers. But at any rate, I'm fairly certain it was a dog that mauled those three different families of cars. Now, several different TV shows have done episodes on the Lizard Man, such as Destination Truth, Season 3, Episode 14, Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, Season 2, Episode 18, and the Animal X Natural Mystery Unit, Episode 7. They are actually out of Australia, and you can find the Destination Truth and the Animal X Natural Mystery Unit on YouTube. Links are in the description. The Destination Truth episode is probably the best of them all, but the Fact or Faked episode did some experimenting to try and figure out what exactly could have caused the damage. And their conclusion was, well, really just inconclusive. I don't think they came down on it one way or the other, but they tested it with a hydraulic jaw that had teeth in it. They tested guns, which it wouldn't have been guns anyway because people would have reported gunfire, not to mention that some of the holes in the grill are downward facing, so if you were going to put a hole in there with a gun, you'd have to be standing over top of it, shooting down, and that's simply not very practical. And then the last thing they tried were power tools, which unfortunately, well, are kind of loud. So, yeah, wasn't terribly scientific. But the one thing that I think they didn't account for, and this is my speculation, having owned a Grand Caravan, I'm fairly certain the grill, the pictures that show the holes, which appear to be horizontal in orientation, I am almost certain that that particular part is plastic. I don't think that has a metal grill. I'm almost 100% certain that that is plastic. And we know that dogs can chew through plastic, right? That's definitely something they can do. So, as far as what destroyed, or, well, they didn't really destroy, but what mauled the cars, my guess, more than likely, it was at least one, maybe two or more dogs. So what do I think it was? Well, so far as the existence of this cryptid being an actual flesh and blood animal, we come to what I tend to call the Cotton Eye Joe paradox. Where did it come from, and where did it go? There doesn't seem to be a breeding population of lizardmen, and some have speculated that it could be an oots, or out-of-time species. But this really doesn't answer the question. So, what is an oots, or what would it be as an oots? Well, the thought is it's probably, if it is in fact an oots, some kind of evolved dinosaur. And these particular dinosaurs, or lizard men, are believed to live in caves. Well, the problem here being that in central South Carolina, there really aren't any caves. In fact, there's not many caves in South Carolina as a whole. So that explanation falls a bit flat. The only other theory, and this is one that I'm proposing, as I don't really see any other sources actually saying this, if it was in fact biological, it might be a reptilian extraterrestrial, which are reported rather commonly by experiencers. So, it could be a reptilian. The last, and probably just as outlandish thing I could think of, is perhaps the lizard man is interdimensional, stepping from its when and where into ours, and vanishing just as quickly, leaving nothing but bewildered locals. At any rate, folks, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Is the lizard man real? Was it real? Or perhaps was it just a case of mistaken identity? So, that's all we have for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, great. Please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about us. If you did not like what you heard, well then, I thank you for listening this long. You can find us on our social medias, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We can be found either at Paranormal Operator 23 or Paranormal Ops 23. Our email, if you want to get in contact with us, is paranormaloperator23@gmail.com. Or, if you don't trust Gmail for whatever reason, you can reach out through our website, contact@paranormal23.com. And with that, also on the website, we have our reporting form. So if you have an encounter with something supernatural, paranormal, or occult, please do let us know, and we might feature your story on our next podcast. That website, again, is paranormaloperator23.com. Well, until next time, folks, keep searching in the darkness.